Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second day of the 2021 Summit for Online Leadership Administration. Today's second general session, Scaling Online at Publix, What Works and What Might Not. My name is Brandon Kaiser, and I'm part of the UPCEA team here to help our attendees and presenters with today's session. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly mention a few items. Today's session is being recorded and will be available through the conference website for 1 month and later archived on CORE, UPCEA's member community and online networking forum. We welcome you to revisit the content and share it with colleagues. Closed captions are available from our partners at Verbit, and we invite you to ask questions anytime during the webinar by typing them into the chat feature located in your control panel at the bottom of your video window. The presenters will address them as they are able or at the end of the session. Lastly, I'd like to thank our featured partner, Wiley Education Services, for their support. Now to get us started, please allow me to pass things over to Mark Wheeler at Wiley Education Services, who would like to say a few words.
Well, hello, everyone. I hope this week has been treating you well here at the UPCEA conference, and a big round of virtual applause for all those folks here at UPCEA. They've done a phenomenal job here with the platform, and it's just a great environment. So thank you for that. So as Brandon mentioned, my name is Mark Wheeler, and I am the Senior Director of New Partner Development for Wiley Education Services. And for those not familiar with Wiley Education Services, we partner with colleges and universities, both nationally and internationally, to support and scale their online programs. We have 20 plus years of experience supporting our partners in this capacity. And in fact, we have over 70 partners today representing over 900 programs. So most folks know us as an OPM, or what you would call an online program management provider. And while this is our core competency, it certainly is, we like to think of ourselves more as a learning solutions provider, and that we can take our services and create a flexible approach to supporting your unique and specific needs. Everything from market strategy and research services to marketing services to recruitment and enrollment services to retention services and program design and development services. We can take these services and architect a solution that's fitting or aligned specifically to your needs. So we'd be happy to share further information with you when you get a chance. So please stop by our booth at Wiley Education Services. We'd love to continue a conversation with you. With that, I am honored to introduce the general session, which is certainly an important topic to all of us: scaling programs at Publix, what works and what might not. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce our moderator, Hala Esmail from Louisiana State University.
Thank you so much, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. As Mark shared, I'm Hala Esmail from LSU, and welcome to our presentation on scaling online at public universities. I will be facilitating this session, and as Brandon shared, if you have any questions, please pop them into the chat area, and I'll keep my eye on those and bring up questions to the attention of our great speakers as we continue through today's session. Brandon, if you don't mind advancing to the next slide, please. So these are our speakers for today's session. We're not going to be doing introductions just yet. Each speaker will introduce themselves as they lead a conversation on one of the 4 themes of this session. So to kick things off, I'll turn it over to Dr. Sasha Thackerberry.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. So one of the things that we're going to be doing throughout this is really talking about all of the different ways to take over the world, right? The same thing we do every night. So many of us are being charged with enrollment growth, but also some of those other questions are, is it enrollment growth at all costs? Is it revenue generation and enrollment growth? Are you really going for a revenue generation? We're calling it enrollment growth. Is this an extension of your mission? Is this a core part of your mission? You know, are you land grant? Are you R1? Are you both? And we're going to sort of wrap this up in a bow as well at the very end. And Chris is going to dive a little bit more into culture and institutional identity, because that's really important in here. But as you all know, working at an online public institution involves a lot of herding cats, and we are in an internal competition to see who has the most creative segue from slide to slide using that code word. So stay tuned for that. And while this presentation isn't really about COVID, there's a lot of COVID-esque implications in it. So just a little brief joke, and as you've probably gathered, I really, 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 really care for memes. But talking about digital transformation all of a sudden, I think many of us are in a very different place than we were in having the same conversation a year ago, and hugely different than 2 years ago, right? As we all head towards that demographic cliff, and we're all positioning to make sure our institutions are successful. So in the presentation description, we sort of thought about this in 4 buckets. So thinking about public universities scaling online, what does that mean for marketing, recruitment, retention? That's actually the thing that traditionally public institutions are the worst at, just in general, in the online space. And that brings us to our second bucket, which Dara is going to be speaking about, insourcing versus outsourcing. A very timely announcement at the beginning, the sponsorship by Wiley, because they are an OPM, and OPMs are needed in the space. And then I'm going to be discussing a little bit about resourcing and technical infrastructure. And then, as I mentioned previously, Chris is going to be diving into institutional identity and culture change. And one of my very favorite colleagues in the field, who I met at Southern New Hampshire University, is Rini Eborn, who is excellent at herding cats.
Thank you, Sasha. Yes, so as Sasha was mentioning, part of, your efforts in growing your university, especially scaling online, you have to get the students there, first of all, right? You have to let them know about you, you have to recruit them, and then you hope you retain them, right? That is something that is very important. And traditionally in higher education, that's very, it's been often very decentralized. A lot of colleges have different programs, and they do their own marketing, or they do their own recruitment. Just recently in the last few years, a lot of schools are realizing that coming together and centralizing some of those offices and those efforts is very valuable. And that happened for us at Utah State University just this last year during this big year of the pandemic. I started out the year last year, about this time I was at SOLA+R in Louisiana, where it was nice and warm there. And I was all about how I'm going to change students' lives, how I'm going to bring them to campus and make that campus experience for them. And then within a month, I had to pivot, right? I had to pivot. So traditionally, from a marketing perspective, universities do billboard ads, they do bus wraps, they do, little social media, they have, different roles. And so it's really important that you look at the way you're organized, right? And as you herd those cats, you're a little bit more able to do things a little bit better. So it's important to look at and talk about your organizational structure. Sometimes there's things that are decentralized and you need to pull them together, or you might need to pull them out. And you need to look at things from a financial perspective as well. A lot of public institutions, we just do not have the funding to market like some of the powerhouse universities do. We do not have millions of dollars to spend monthly on digital marketing or commercials or things like that. And so you have to really come together to be able to market, recruit, and provide that access to those students that are those post-traditional students that might be really wanting to come and participate in an online opportunity. And we found this last year with the COVID that we couldn't just automatically reorganize, right? We actually had to collaborate. We actually had to bring new teams together and just create different teams and create collaborations around some of these things. And I know that my colleagues, as we discussed and prepared for this, they were doing the same thing. I know that they were thinking about how to do that at their institutions as well. And so I think that I know that Sasha and Chris and Dara, they all had to think about marketing and recruiting in a different way, and they probably have things to share as well.
Yes, as you know, I always have things to share, but I saw Dara unmute, so I'm going to toss it back over to her.
Well, I was just going to say, Rini, this is such, marketing and advertising is such a big deal in the online space. So it sounds like you really, collaborated, but were you able to get enough of those dollars to be able to compete? How did you think about that?
That's a great question. So what we did is we had money ready to go for different types of marketing, right? I had money saved for radio ads or for bus ads or for, different things. And so we brought different teams together. We brought people from marketing. We brought people from programs like our online MBA program together. And we just all came together and said, let's not spend the money this way. Let's spend the money this way. And we actually moved forward with a new digital marketing campaign. We went out really fast and did an RFP, and we hired a digital marketing agency to help us because we realized people we couldn't do the same thing that we always had done in the past. So we had to come together and collaborate and figure out that money out together and pool our money together because we just didn't have the same financial resources that some of the larger schools had. We were a state school. So, and we were very successful. We were able to do that relatively quickly because they cared so much. And so it was really kind of inspirational in some ways that we were able to do that. And it is hurting cats, I'll admit.
Oh, can I just pop in really quickly, Rini, also on that? And I think this connects really well with what Dara is about to talk about, insourcing versus outsourcing. That marketing spend is just a huge barrier, I think, for a lot of public institutions from an imagination perspective as much as anything else, because folks just can't wrap around their heads around the amount of money you need in direct marketing spend. It really should be between 10 to 15% of your overall tuition revenue. And that's like a hard nut to swallow for a lot of folks. But I will also say that if you don't have that sort of spending centralized, if you can't calculate the cost of acquisition of a specific student, it cost me $1,500 to get an undergrad student and $3,000 to get a graduate student. Your institution is probably spending that money anyways. It's just spending it from 15 different units. And so it's not capturing that cost. Public institutions are just terrible at actually capturing indirect cost or even direct costs and tracking that directly back. So if there's a case, if you can make the case for, okay, well, we have these positions here and we're spending this here and we're spending this here, it's actually the same amount of money. We're just doing it wildly inefficiently. Now, I will say that that is a hard sell at most institutions. And so there is a need, as Rini had mentioned, and Dara is going to speak about, online program management companies do have, I think, fill a need in this space.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sasha. That's a perfect inroads into talking about insourcing versus outsourcing. So at the University of Illinois, Chicago, I lead online learning, and we were trying to figure out essentially how can we scale online learning at University of Illinois, Chicago, and how can we fund it? So just a little background to our situation, which might be similar to yours. I put together this piece of data to sort of convince the university that we had an opportunity in online, because before you can even go out and figure out how to scale online, you have to convince your colleagues that there's an opportunity there. And so I put together the data to show that the percent of students in fully online programs, undergraduates, 15% of undergraduates nationally are in fully online programs, and a third of graduate students. And then I compared that to the situation in the center here at our university. 1% of undergrads are in fully online programs and 6% of our graduate students. We haven't developed new online programs in over 15 years. And our focus of online programs has always been smaller niche programs, high quality programs. In fact, I'm proud to say we just got the #2 rating from US News and World Reports for our undergrad bachelor's programs, which is a real testament to our faculty in that area. But we realized we had an opportunity. The national numbers show that students want other programs, other larger programs that we didn't have. So this ended up being something I would take to almost every dean's meeting, every faculty meeting, to show the opportunity that exists, that we just don't have the options for students right now. And so to get there, to scale and to do what Rini was talking about with advertising, we realized we would need to outsource. And so we outsourced to an online program management company. And this, I think actually was a way that really helped us to herd cats, which I will talk about shortly. Now, there's lots of different options when it comes to thinking about how am I going to fund this? How am I going to fund so I can scale? And it ranges from doing everything in-house on the left, where you may have a staff and you may fund a whole unit to do everything, to the opposite, which is 100% outsourcing, which is what we chose to do with hiring an online program manager. And there's lots of options in between. This can be a messy one, but also a successful one, purchasing an online school so that you have that capacity and you bring it in-house. You could hire consultants for different pieces. You could also hire an OPM to do different pieces and pay them a portion of your tuition revenue rather than putting out the cash. And there's also situations where you can actually partner with a vendor to provide content, white label content. So there's all different ways to do it. And it'll really depend on what your university, what's palatable for your university. Sasha, I think you all are at the we're over here at OPM, you're over here at 100% in-house.
Yes, and we did insource from having been with a partner, and that's quite a journey in and of itself as well. One of the additional things, and I know you have a great slide about pros and cons coming up next, but in terms of the cultural pieces and the context that your institution is at, and then sometimes, I don't know if y'all have had this experience, but you have a little bit of a revolving door of executive leadership at some institutions. And so it is a hard thing to stay the course to build internal infrastructure. It is a hard thing, and people have to be willing to take punches and make the case day in and day out. And I know that's one of the pros of not having, building it yourself, going with an OPM, that's one of the pros. And I know that there's a lot of sort of herding cats involved in that.
So as we thought about the OPM, we really weighed the pros and the cons. And in our situation, I think the pros outweighed the cons, as the scale shows. So on the pro side, what was interesting to me was actually partnering with an OPM created some momentum for change, because I was able to show the data, to show the opportunity we have to grow online enrollment. And then I was also able to say, here's the package of services that we have with the OPM. And I went around to each of the different colleges within our university to talk with them about whether or not this would make sense for them. It was ultimately a decision that was up to the dean and the faculty of each college, and they would opt in. But I really do think that having that sort of package of here's how it would work, here's the timeline, was something that helped us get momentum. The other two reasons that we went with the OPM was we didn't have a large instructional designer staff. So we didn't have enough of people with those expertise to work one-on-one with faculty to develop the online courses. So that we were looking to the OPM for. And then that third piece that Rini talked about, we didn't have the bucket of dollars to start with to launch these new high demand online programs. Some of you might have access to grants that might help you get off the ground, or there might be a different bucket of money, but we didn't have that. So going with the online program management route enabled us to pay coming out of the tuition revenue generated. The fourth point I wanted to just say is I still do think of this as a launch accelerator. I hope to talk more with Sasha in the coming weeks, months, and years, because it's my vision that the OPM could help us ramp up and get these degree programs developed and launched in the marketplace, and that eventually we could take them back in-house, since we have a small but mighty and talented in-house team doing some of this. On the con side, though, is, like I said, you're sharing a large portion of the tuition, which is challenging, especially in these times. And then this notion of dependency. Will we become dependent on our partner? Or will we be able to build, but also remain independent so that we've got different options on the other end of it?
Dara, can I ask you a question that I think a lot of people are probably wondering? You mentioned the buy-in that you received from the deans, and at a public institution with a faculty governance type of culture and identity, how can you give this group some tips for how you went about gaining buy-in from faculty in addition to the deans?
Yeah, Chris, that's a great question. I really think it was that combination of talking about the opportunity, and I really framed it as far as access, because what was really happening without the offerings, the large degree offerings, we weren't able to give access to our university to working professionals who can't get to campus. And the University of Illinois Chicago is really about providing access to all different types of learners. And so what I really showed is that what we're missing is the online programs for working professionals. So showing that data, showing how other universities like us have shifted and have expanded their portfolio to reach those types of learners by showing that national data really helped. And then also being upfront about what the OPM provides and what the university still retains. I mean, the OPM, we're leaning on them for the instructional designers, the advertising, but all the academic pieces are still the universities, the curriculum, the advising, the grading. So just having those kinds of conversations, college by college, and just sort of finding internal ambassadors within each college.
Yeah, and there was just a really interesting question about how do you deal with sort of this conflict of interests when you have your OPM is also representing the university down the road. And I think that's a really interesting question from a couple of different perspectives. Being at a university, and I'll talk about talk about the cats that I have to herd in 1 minute, but that is one of those things where you can really leverage the strengths of an OPM because they actually have all that infrastructure, but they are going to be using the same tactics for you as they are for that other university. Now, often that's because there's data behind those tactics. Those tactics work, right? But one of the challenges, though, is how are you going to be able to differentiate your programs on something other than price? Because as much as we like to think it's our brands, and our brands do have a lot to do with it, the number one choice online learners make is price. It is price, it is price, it is price. So there is a danger of aligning yourself to a place where you're inadvertently competing on price with other institutions who are using the same OPM. So just keep that in mind, because that is one of those things. Yes, absolutely. Price, I would say perceived value. You're absolutely right. I'm going to transition now to, again, my local chaos. My name is Sasha Thackerberry. I am the Vice President for Online and Continuing Education at LSU. And in that context, I lead both our fully online division and our continuing education division, which involves non-credit credentials as well as some credit correspondence courses or the evolution of those, and also our Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, pre-college programming, kind of that whole grab bag. The reason these departments were aligned is obviously because of the online pieces, but I think more importantly, our big strategy is all about stackables. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about resourcing and technical infrastructure. The thing that we did do was actually insource from an OPM. And my president at the time, who is now at Oregon State University, F. King, he is fantastic. And he said, yeah, we're going to have 30,000 online learners, which is the same amount of learners as we have face-to-face, after they hired me, right? So they hired me and then they told me 30,000. So I was like, maybe we should have started with I'm just kidding. It was fine. It was fun. And then it turned into 45,000 because that's how many students we have across the system. So I said, well, let's get to the 30,000 first, and then we'll go to the 45,000. Keep in mind, we're starting at 803. So the first thing we had to do was literally build everything from scratch. They had 9 programs, Dara. It was a very similar situation. They had not developed programs in many years, and nobody even knew like the full scope of what were the steps to put a program fully online. And so all of that had to be created, which just needs a huge amount of resources. And I can't think of a segue right now. Can you just advance the slide? But when we look at these things, my continual piece, my continual pitch has always been, what result do you want? There's 2 doors. If you have these resources, I can give you these results. If you give me these resources, I can give you these results. But I can't give you these results with these resources. So that's just the reality at the end of the day. We're already net positive from having insourced 3 years ago. So that's pretty significant. And we actually never went into the red from insourcing everything. So we always were able to cover that and get significant funding back to our colleges and to our institution. But when you look at resourcing, all of these folks on this slide, as well as many others, have very, very different models for resourcing, right? So Oregon State University, they have an internal revenue share model that pushes the majority of the funding to the colleges. We have a revenue model whereby a percentage goes to the college, goes to academic affairs, and goes to us for that eat what you kill piece. UMass Online is actually almost in some senses a clearinghouse that, you know, pushes the degrees out to the institutions that have their own revenue share. Penn State World Campus, I love their model. They're a campus, but not a separate college, which is hugely advantageous from the degree standpoint. Like, what does it actually say on your degree? eVersity, which if you don't know Michael Moore, they're a big fan of him. They are building an online university from the ground up. They are outsourcing some pieces, insourcing some pieces, because that startup funding is not minor. UMGC, of course, is that sort of core piece that is the you know, hugely well-known, very robust brand. But there are online programs that are available at other places now, and there was some news about that for Inside Higher Ed. You've got to have the funding. It doesn't exist without the funding. And this is where it's hard at a state university to make that pitch to say, no, this is an investment. This is not like a capital expense. We're not putting this into a building that you're going to have to rebuild in 2 years. This is truly an investment. And institutions that don't make those investments now are going to absolutely be behind the 8 ball. If we think that this competitive arena is one way now, wait until 2025 hits. I saw you unmute, Rainey. So where were you going?
I was going to just say, I wanted to add on for some of you that are out there that you're thinking, you know, the OPMs or whatever. If from Utah State University, we have not outsourced to an OPM. We're much like Sasha. We've been building it internally. We have a really big group of instructional designers. But after this last year hit, we realized we've got to figure some things out. We have, you know, we've got these, like Sasha said, we've got to decide where to invest. And I highly recommend doing small pilots and trying things out and not being scared of that. I mean, you want to make sure that you pick the right partner to help you to meet your goals. And so, because I saw in the chat that some people were saying that OPMs can make it worse. Absolutely, if it's not the right fit for your institution. Utah State, you know, as of any institution, they really care about their university brand. And so we're going to be very cautious about the partnerships that we have. But I think that it's important not to be scared to pilot something and fail fast and move on. And so we've been doing some small collaborative pilots, and I recommend doing that if you guys are if you're starting to think about those type of things.
I would just +1 to everything Rini says. And it also has to go to, I think that is somebody going to toe the line, or when they need a new research project done over here, when there's a new student retention project, or you have to figure out, is somebody going to pull that funding? Because that is not going to work. It's just not going to work. And if you wouldn't mind herding cat, I'm going to herd cats again. This is just really, this is devolving. Talking about the technology though, and someone had mentioned this earlier, there is a huge tech stack that does go behind this. And we had also spoken in our preparation for this that it is hard to get some of the professionals. It's hard to compete with the OPMs and with other of those large online institutions to get folks who are great at digital marketing, who are great at the exact metrics that you need for, how many students should you have per recruiter, how many students should you have per retention expert, all of those, the metrics that go behind that. What is your cost of conversion? What time of day do you want your Google ads to appear at? It's hard to get those professionals, and it's really hard to get them at public university costs. So you're going to have to grow your own if you want to do that in this space. So hire a couple awesome folks and then have them grow their own team locally, because otherwise it's going to be hard to actually afford it. But our CRM, we put in place Salesforce. We are going to be using EDA. I mean, we're using it now, but we're actually even aligning it a little bit closer with its intention. We are using Pardot for marketing automation. And I think another thing that actually we hadn't talked about, but that comes to mind now, is where is your institutional data now? So we had this very interesting thing where instead of being able to get some of that data from our registrar, we had to go to our foundation, because the registrar was sending data on alumni to the foundation. The alumni was getting it from there. We need that data because I want to advertise to those folks and say, hey, is your parent interested, or do you want to, now that you've started your career, do you want to get it graduate, do you want to get your graduate degree online? So I think there's a lot of those pieces, but the technology that goes into it, you're going to be hiring developers, you're going to be hiring folks like Salesforce administrators. Five9, it records every single call. We have like KPIs on every single thing. We're starting to do A/B testing on the website. All those infrastructure pieces, again, an OPM has that. They have it the exact same though. And I don't want to say exact same, I don't want to offend our OPM friends, but I will say that they use best practices in a fairly standardized way. And that's how they make money, right? Economies of scale, all that good stuff. But having full control over that means that you can experiment a little bit with those things. But it's just a huge, it's a huge initial lift. But like Rini was saying, you don't have to go like in the deep end. You can start with a piece and then add it. And most public universities do have advantages of student workers, graduate assistants, like go for your internal resources. And Chris, I know I saw your hand up there.
I'm eager to ask, Sasha, because I think your example at LSU is a really good case study of how tools like Salesforce really play into the automation of the operations. And I know we talked about this recently. So if maybe you and Rini and Derek could speak to that idea that you're going to have to front load with capital and FTE, because you're doing a tremendous amount of manual, almost intervention work prior to implementing the technical infrastructure that allows you to automate and then scale in a cost-effective manner. So what does that look like? What does that look like at LSU and Rini and Dara for you as well at your respective institutions?
So a really great question. So I would say not only are we having to front load on personnel a little bit, I will say that we are wildly seeking efficiencies as we interact with other parts of the university. So whereas, we support online students, we don't have a separate enrollment management unit. We use enrollment management. We use our central financial aid. Well, our students expect a very different turnaround time. So we're having to plug like process holes with extra people that once we get like our transfer credit process streamlined and some of those other technology systems in place, we really want to move to a high-tech, high-touch environment. And what's happening now is, I think our ratios of numbers of students to like our concierge roles are going to remain like sort of the same. So I would say overall, our goal is to have about one staff member per 115 students. So, but that's recruitment and retention combined, right? So your load for the recruiters might be 300 or 500 students, depending on your conversion rates. And then the load for your other folks is smaller. And how those resources go back and forth depends on the program, how expensive it is, all those pieces. But I would definitely say that the automation is what's going to get you to scale, right? So, I mean, we started with literally, this is not a joke, before we got 5.9, we had people picking up the phone to call prospective students to respond to lead forms, and wait for it, we have a long distance code. So they were picking up the phone, trying to put in a 9-digit long distance code, then punching the student's thing in. Well, now with 5.9, you can automate the call. If someone doesn't pick up, there's an auto message that's left, and then we can see in Salesforce how many calls were made to that student. For an MBA program, what's your cadence of calls versus for another program? But again, if you're insourcing that, you have to do all that yourself. You set it all up. You have 100% control over it. All the resources. For us, a big selling point is we're hiring those jobs in our local community. That's not funding that's going out of state. And Rini, I know that y'all also work with your other internal units, right?
Yeah, right now we're doing the same thing. We're front loading everything. We're trying to clean up our processes. One advantage that Utah State University has is that we have a very strong operational IT backbone. And with the onslaught of digital technology right now, especially, that automation piece is going to be where you're going to be able to scale. So you need to make sure, if you don't have a an IT digital strategy team or people thinking about that, that would be the first thing you'd want to start to do, is you want to start thinking about that, because you need to be able to, in order to think of new value propositions or new programs and to be inspired, you've got to have the digital capacity to do so. And so we're lucky that we have a strong operational backbone. And so what we're doing right now is we're cleaning up our process, and we're trying to see where we can seek those wild efficiencies, as you said, Sasha, and make it a more high touch opportunity and create some transformation. And there's a whole science and methodology around that, but you've definitely got to have, IT's got to be at the table with you in these discussions to be able to scale online.
Yeah, Rini, if I could just also very quickly mention that we have really built out a project management office as well, which is kind of a unique part of the triad, the capital funding, the IT infrastructure, and then just business process improvement. So we've really been doubling down on that resource in terms of being able to identify, where there are process issues, and then almost like process green berets, we launch our, individuals from that team to then identify opportunities for improvement, and then we pull them back and move them into, different areas. So
that's great. Yeah, process is important.
Process is so important, and documenting it. I think one of the other pieces we're looking at, Chris, is, how agile do you want to be versus, or agile as a thing rather than agile as a methodology, agile versus waterfall. I really don't think, we're not a software development company, so we can't get away from like having launch dates for things and then needing to back out dates before that. But one of the things I've recently become really fascinated with is Lean Six Sigma. So looking at things and how are you collecting data to actually like do root cause analysis, and where are we seeing the big gaps that we can, spend that attention and solve, like the 80-20. Where are you prioritizing your efforts? And I will say that I think that's something that universities are generally speaking, public universities, the larger it is in general, again, the harder it is for people to remain like really laser focused on what their priority is. And part of that is because we don't measure things right, or we're not measuring enough in between. So what we're going for is, our enrollments. Okay, well, to get to enrollments, on the recruitment side, you have to be measuring your leads. How many leads do you need per program? How much are you spending per program? Where are you spending that money? And then you need to look at, okay, what are our conversion rates? What does that mean for KPIs? So one of the challenges we've had is we've had to work and our HR department has been amazing, because we couldn't hire once a month. When you're trying to hire like concierges to support students, or if you call them advisors, if you call them, whatever you call them, you can't be constrained by some of these historical patterns or historical ways of doing things. So we just hire them when we hire them now. So HR has been just a great partner with us. But a student's waiting to be supported. We can't wait until the first of the next month to get them in there. So that has resulted, actually now HR is starting people university-wide every Monday. They have a new start date every Monday. And we've seen this time and time again, whereby, before folks were calling students and saying, hey, it's time to register and pay for your classes. Now they are. Part of that could be COVID, but they're doing that with our traditional students now. The other thing is working hours. You cannot be successful scaling in an 8 to 4:30 world. It ain't gonna happen. You need weekends, you need Saturdays. And I was told when I first came there, I was like, oh, well, our working hours are 8 to 4:30. And I was like, okay, so we're going to have 2 shifts. We're going to have a 7 to 3. And then so we have folks there, I think, until 9 at night. And then we have Saturday shifts now, and we have chatbots and all that. Not chatbots. That's the next thing. We have web chat. But the comment was, oh, we can't do that. And my question was, is that written down somewhere? Like, is that a policy? So we just put it on the next job description and started doing it. Like, you can keep telling me it can't be done, but we're gonna do it, and then we'll see how it happens. And sometimes you have to change policy. We've had to change several historical policies. Everything can be changed unless it's a state law. And even then, if you're not in Louisiana, you can probably get that changed too. Louisiana has a little bit of a different, we have Napoleonic law. There's extra special things about how we work together in government as a state. But I think those pieces, like the technology pieces, huge, gotta have it, or you're not gonna get to economies of scale. And I would say we didn't go too deeply into the budgeting, but I know I got a couple questions about how the revenue share works. I would absolutely say that, like, your pro formas, your budgets have to really be able to communicate when do you get to economies of scale. So what you're looking for is a descending cost of student support and a descending cost of instruction. So from the instructional design side, that means a very, very tight course portfolio. You don't want every course online. You only want the minimum number of courses you need online. And then you want a very, very tight course carousel so that you can get your fill rates up. Well, you talk to most people about economies of scale and fill rates, and this even goes to how you're paying faculty for it. If you pay faculty per online student, you will never get to a descending cost of instruction, right? So you have to look at those things on the front end, because otherwise you may just end up spending money and not getting to economies of scale. And that is a huge advantage if you're trying to scale in online institutions. You want that ROI at the end of the day, right? So I think the appropriate budgeting, and if anyone's interested, you can always just hit me up at my email, and I'll share with you. I mean, we've spent a lot of time on models and what these things look like, and that's something that you absolutely need to try to communicate. And again, maybe 50% of that's under your control, so the other 50% you have to culturally advocate for. Hala, are we missing anything? And catch me up on the chat.
Yeah, there's a few great questions. One I'm looking at, and I'm wondering if I should hold until Chris's section, which is coming right up. But one attendee asks, it seems like schools are breaking up with their OPMs. I just attended an earlier session about this, and the federal government is starting to look at them. Are they going to be viable options in the future?
Does anybody want to take this? I could just answer that with yes. They will be viable options.
Yes.
If there is money to be made, they will continue down this path. And unless it's something like we get a ton of regulations all of a sudden, I actually think it would disadvantage a fair amount of the smaller universities right now who have really needed OPMs. I will say that I have my own challenges. With it is essentially putting public money into a private company at the end of the day without a net infrastructure gain. Like, I would love to see some OPM models where it's not fee for service. It is a tuition revenue share with an expectation of helping the institution build it themselves. So I think there's some space there where it truly could be seen as an accelerator. And I think there's got to be a business model in there too. I think maybe this is filled somehow by consultants, but it's not really done in a way that you could leverage like the tuition revenue for like you outsource it, and then part of what you're paying for is for them to teach you how to insource it.
I think too, Sasha, to build on that, that there will always be permutations of the OPM model. So there will always be something that isn't the full suite revenue share. And so I think it always comes back to, and this is a good maybe transition, is this idea of how fast do you want to go and how far do you think you can go? And that's realistically, that's oftentimes where the consultative support, the OPM solution, is all about how fast and how far. And that really it goes back to 3 of what I call the W questions. So first of all, why would you want to scale, or what is the purpose of scaling online learning? And really, this, I think, was covered pretty well up front. Sasha mentioned that oftentimes this is a function of identity relative to mission, and Dara mentioned this as access, so access to workforce opportunities that come through the completion of an academic credential of some sort. So this issue of kind of why then is scaling important? Well, if you look at the body of literature, and there actually is such a thing, meaning there have been lots of questions and articles written about this very topic, meaning why would we be investing? Why would we be moving as fast as we can? Most of the time, what we hear, and I think this is anecdotal as well, is that the revenue enrollment growth is a top priority. It just is. We're moving into a resource scarce environment, which is a cyclical thing. It happens. However, many years. The other part of that, which is very much a counterbalance, is an amplification or an extension of the academic mission. Meaning, just as Dara said when she had to convince her faculty that the OPM solution was as much about being able to provide access more quickly, more effectively. It's a major part of why we're looking at, on a regular basis, expanding the online work. Is, again, enrollment revenue, amplifying the academic mission. This also comes back to student success. So they have to factor in somewhere. So these systems and these resources and strategies, they all hopefully roll up to some type of understanding that we're serving the student. So as Sasha said, the price sensitivity has only become more of a prominent issue as the market space is commoditizing. The business signals are saying, watch out if you're going to compete without the appropriate amount of capital. So we have to figure out, where do we fit relative to that larger space? What is our identity? What are our distinct advantages relative to a value proposition? And then how do we enter into it? So some of the big questions that I've mapped out here, one is this idea of mission. So all of us are public institutions, but as you know, there's a wide variety of different players in the space. They're for profit. There are state commissioned institutions, which I'll talk a little bit about, being from Colorado. And there are really now, I would say, kind of small versions of vendors or different permutations of vendors in the space, organizations like Straighterline, who provide lower cost front end articulation pathways into degree programs. Another question is strategic assets. So if you are a land grant, you obviously have owned for maybe more than 100 years some sense of access responsibility to your constituents in the state, and you probably have some form of level of funding tied into those into those groups. State, county, federal. The other thing is, how much capital are you willing to put into the work? So this is something that Sasha brought up, meaning if the leadership support is willing to invest at I would say a level that is commensurate with the competition in the open kind of landscape, then the idea is that you'll move forward with relative success. But there's a need for investment. The next thing is potential to scale capability. So we've talked about automation, process, capital. So one has to really start at these bigger questions of what type of resourcing and potential do you have to keep scaling your operations. And as was brought up in the notes, the other thing is the other W question is what. And so what are you doing is relevant because you don't want to scale broken systems and inefficient processes. We have to get the foundation of the enterprise in order before we scale. So we're simply not propagating, proliferating process issues and inefficiencies. So another issue that one has to think about. The next thing, and this is, I would say, very well kind of covered by Chloe, one of the organizations who looks at benchmarking for online activity. This question of, is there a chief learning officer? Is there a strategic plan? Again, if you look at the literature, you look at the case studies, particularly the crash and burn examples, in most cases, there was not a strategic plan undergirding the online enterprise work. And so really making sure there's tight alignment with senior leadership and with a well-formed business principle rich strategic plan. Last thing is organizational topology. So if you're a state college, are you a part of a system? If you're not, do you have opportunities to partner? So scale is as much about getting things right in your own backyard as it is leveraging partnerships across geographies and perhaps even across programs. So you see this play out pretty well within systems where the system consolidates the online activity under the system itself. So just a few other, oh, please go ahead.
I'm sorry. I totally want to jump in because this is something that Chris is going to speak to in just a minute. There is a lot of I don't want to say problems. There are challenges when you're part of a system and you share a brand and everybody has their own online program. You're literally bidding for the same keywords against each other. And then in places like, Oregon State University eCampus, they've got that figured out. Penn State has got that figured out. Other places stand up entirely online institutions, but that brand piece has so much to do with like, what is your differentiation? If you have to have duplicative programs, can you separate them by a specialization? How do you make sure that your online identities aren't actually competing with each other? Because if your state legislature or your central state board hasn't asked those questions yet, they're going to. At some point, they're going to say, wait, this same institution has 4 different undergraduate business online degrees. Don't we just need one? They're going to ask that question. So it's important that you have answers to that. And if you are going to insource this stuff, it really is important that you know how yours is different.
Yeah, so thank you. So the questions that you can see on the right are really meant to provide something of a heuristic around the dimensions of kind of decision-making that one has to go through. Are you a business enterprise or are you an academic entity? Are you focused on revenue, public good, cost versus value? These decisions are really meant to be thought through in terms of a spectrum. So these are not binary. You'll have to find kind of where you land. Before advancing to the last slide, I just want to say that oftentimes the way that I describe our identity to our campus partners is we're a business enterprise with academic mission fueled by social purpose. So these types of organizations embedded in public entities are complicated. We have to serve a number of different goals. So if you could advance to the last slide. So I just wanted to end with this thought that in Colorado, we have this really interesting, I would describe it sandbox or case study where I lead CSU Online, Colorado State University Online, but there's also CSU Global. And each of them really represents what I would consider to be a case study in the different kinds of identity differences that have led to different outcomes. And so you can see in the middle here, CSU Online, we have certain limitations, constraints around academic autonomy, even operational constraints, whereas CSU Global very much focused on market-driven return, and therefore their growth has been pretty high, 28 to 30% some years, and they've eclipsed us in terms of just their overall size. So I'd like to end there and see, Sasha, if you can wrap us up, and really appreciate this panel.
Yeah, you guys are great. And it was interesting how we threw this together because Rini and I had been talking about some options, and then Chris and I had started talking, and then Irene at Dara, I forget how we connected, but this is one of the powers of APSIA where you can really reach out to any of us or any of your other cohorts and really connect on these things. I think we've gotten a lot of valuable information from so many folks who've helped us establish what are our quality metrics and what are our parameters, what are our goals, how are we measuring success. I would say to anyone who is interested in building and scaling this stuff online, you absolutely can do it. We insourced and we've had 71% increase in overall enrollments in our fully online programs just between last year and this year. And we measure those every single term. So that's not like, you know, once in the fall and then the next fall. This is, we're measuring that 6 times a year. So that growth is really significant. But it was a big lift over a couple of years. And if I did not have the executive level support, it wouldn't be possible. I think that's one of the things that a lot of us are wondering is next year, are we going to have the same executive level support? Are we going to have funding to continue to do things that are expanded mission? And I think this is where we can always use each other as case studies. So feel free to say, oh, look, Sasha's budget over at LSU is $3 million and see what that gave you, or vice versa. When they defunded something at this other institution, look what happened. And so I think that's where this community is super valuable. And I just want to thank all of you, and also Hala, who we hardly let you get a word in edgewise. We're big talkers. So thank you all so much. We really appreciate it. Appreciate Brandon and obviously Julie, who I'm a big fan of, and Mark. Not to get down on OPMs, they do serve a purpose and also pay the bills. So go OPMs.
So a huge thank you to our great speakers here today for sharing your experiences and your wisdom, and to all of you who joined us for this session. And we hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.